It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, we're going to get right to the show here today. In this episode of Retire Repurposed, we continue our miniseries exploring insights gained since Ben Taatjes wrote his first book, Repurposed, in 2017. We dive into this concept of identity in retirement, discussing how retirees can avoid a role-less role and find fulfillment beyond societal expectations. Drawing on this idea of liminality, we examine how Christian retirees can now focus on becoming more Christ-like rather than adhering to worldly expectations. Ben Taatjes shares inspiring examples from his recent trip to the Black Hills of South Dakota, where he witnessed clients living out this purposeful approach to retirement firsthand. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back. Jared Sebeste here. So glad that you're joining us on another episode of Retire Repurposed. We are continuing this mini-series, a really interesting one based on the first publication of Ben Taatjes' book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, back in 2017. And we spent the last several episodes talking about some of these lessons that he has learned since publishing that first book. And not necessarily lessons that he's learned, but maybe some points that he, I don't want to say underestimated or underemphasized, but really since publishing that book, really got a feeling as to how important some of these messages and points were when it comes to you and your retirement. We've covered topics like underestimating the positive aspects of work, something we've talked about. Your mentality when it comes from saving for retirement to spending in retirement. We had one episode called The Real Reason That You Are Sick and Tired of Working. We've covered different archetypes, how retirement's going to land a little differently for different people. And in last week's show, we talked about how to embrace your true greatness in retirement. Again, these are all topics that we've covered in the past, but we really take a deep dive from a different perspective here when it comes to these topics here over the last couple of shows. If you've missed any of those shows, really important that you go back and listen to those, because that really gives you not only the crux as to what this podcast is all about, but really hammers home a number of these topics that are super important for you and or your retirement. So find Retire Repurposed on your latest podcasting platform. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a comment while you're there, but go back and listen to those shows because they are really filled with a lot of gold nuggets. Ben Taatjes joins me on the show now, and we're going to talk about identity. This is a big one, and we're not titling the show anything having to do with identity, but really at its core, Ben, I think you would agree that a lot of this conversation that we talk about in general, but especially with this show this week, comes down to this whole idea of your identity.
Yeah, Jerry, I think it's one of the hardest things that we see new retirees struggle with is, who am I? And I think so many times we hear that from retiring clients of ours that are just stuck. I wrote about it in the first book. I talked about how they feel as if they're in role-less roles. And that was an idea that came from a book called Encore, Finding the Work That Matters in the Second Half of Life by Mark Friedman. And I enjoyed kind of thinking more about this idea with one of my clients recently, and we're talking through kind of an article that he had sent me. And it was really clear that the idea of role and role identity and this feeling of what he called liminality in this article is being stuck kind of between. And I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I really liked it. We know retirement, right, is a huge transition. In fact, we talk about it in this show all the time. It's like one of the most dangerous days of your life is when you retire and also when you're born. Mm-hmm. And I believe that. I think it's such an important part of life, right? It's such a big transition that we need to talk more about it. Mm-hmm. This boundary crossing from working into not working, how you feel. You're going to feel lost. And one of the things that this article that I was reading for one of my clients talked about was, again, this feeling of liminality, where he said it's framed in this context of a psychological state. It's where you find the presence of liminality, which It was framed in the context as a psychological state understood to mean without a role identity or rolelessness. Liminality is the absence of self-defining or connection to a given social domain. And when I read that from this secular author about identity and your role in this world, I thought, how hard must it be to be a retiree that doesn't find their identity, like you and I do as believers, in our Creator, right? And I think that's where what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because not only are you taking a hit from your job, which probably gave you a role, so to speak. I think a role, that's a really, really important topic. Like, you're missing out on the spiritual component as well in many respects, which we're going to dive in here today. But not having a role, what a helpless feeling. And I could kind of sense the compassion in your voice. Like, what a horrible feeling that must feel like for a retiree when they, I don't want to say give up their job, but be able to walk away from what was probably a very important role throughout their life. And then to wake up every day and not have that, that's got to feel really helpless.
Yeah, it is. And I think they get stuck and they know, I'm not that person anymore. I've lost that key component. I mean, we hear it all the time. People want to be contributors. They want to be adding value. We want to be making a difference. And when you don't have the role that you used to have while working, and that goes for stay-at-home moms, that goes for CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies. If that was your role and you had a lot of your identity focused in that area, and now the kids leave the home or you leave the workplace, you will feel really, really strange, especially if you're coming at it from that's who I was, right? I was created for that purpose.
Yeah. Well, let's do a little history dive, because you did talk about this in your book back in 2017, this whole idea of how retirement at one point in time was really not something to be sought after. It was kind of this interim phase where you were too old to work but too young to die. You said something to that effect. I think that was really interesting. But again, even 100 years ago, before retirement is what it is right now in today's society, there were still hints of this problem even back then, right?
Yeah, I mean, we go back to the late 1800s, Jared, is when this kind of the first start of retirement came up. And it wasn't having to do with, hey, here's some regular income for you that's provided by the government so that you don't have to work. It was, you can't work. In fact, the quote was, it was to provide for those that were disabled from work by age. Okay, so it actually was it was almost a safety net. It was really what we saw. It got much bigger once we got bigger government with Roosevelt and the New Deal. That's when Social Security Act actually started. And I go through some of the general history in the book, and I think realizing that that's why it started, I think is important for people. Now our society has changed that, right? And we've made it feel like, no, it's not that I can't work anymore. It is more that I don't want to work anymore, and now all I want to do is focus on myself. That's typically where we see the retirees of today get lost. It's like, well, I worked so hard all these years, saved enough money that now I can choose not to work. And I'm going to focus on my things, whatever that looks like. I think that's usually where we start to see you kind of run off the track.
Yeah, and probably in some respects, a lot of people, maybe the way it's sold in society is that you've earned this and you're almost entitled to it, and it's probably not a surprise as to why people get off track. And again, we're going to dive into why you feel this way and ways that you can get back, and really what your true essence of who you are, what you're supposed to do. But it's no wonder like people are grasping at straws to try to fill in a void there that it left because of perhaps how it is framed up in their own minds or in society or both.
Yeah, and you'll go to the easy stuff first, Jared, right? I mean, we're going to travel a whole bunch. There's nothing wrong with these things.
Yeah.
If amassing more wealth so you can do more travel and spend more time with family, these are all good things. But when, again, they're the end, not the means. It's like, hey, my whole entire goal in life is so I can travel more.
Yeah.
No, your goal should look different. You were created for more than that. You were created for a specific purpose.
Yeah. So, I mean, this leads us really nicely into the next segment here. So what is that purpose? What's that look like?
Well, I like to start, Jared, is think about is who you were created like, right? And I go back as a believer to saying we are created in His image, God's image. We're image bearers of Christ. So I love looking at my daughter's hands. Whenever I think about image bearers, I think about my daughter Addie, and literally, Jared, there's times where I sit down and we're holding, I pull her hands out and I'm looking, and I don't think she likes this, that her hands look as much like mine, but they're very similar. Yeah. Almost to like where I pull up my thumb and I'm like, look at that, how identical your hands are to mine. And I think about that. I think if we're created in somebody's image, like we're actually in Christ's image, Jared, our hands should begin, as metaphorically, to begin to look like Christ. We should, no matter what part of life we're at, what we're doing, we should start to see the work of our hands become more Christ-like. Or you will feel a void. You will feel as if you're not being who you were created to be. And I think it's important that we remember that's why we were created. And that's what was so hard to read that other article, which came at it from a non-faith-based perspective. Yeah. You're missing the biggest point here. Why you're on this earth in the first place, to be in relationship with Him, your Creator.
Well, we've talked about this. I can't remember if it was last week's show or the week prior, but we were talking about the light inside that God gave you, letting that shine out. That really you're just a rock, kind of like the moon out there in space, which represents the icon on the outside of your book Repurposed, where we are to shine that light. That's a great, that gets me excited for the day. That gives me purpose. I'm not retired, but that gives me meaning to every day, no matter what I'm doing, that there's a reason why we're alive here today.
Yeah. And I think next question is, what does that mean?
Right. What's it look like?
How do I actually be Christ to my neighbor? How do I start to look like Him?
Yeah.
Jared, I think a lot of people today have a problem with Christians because many of us don't look enough like Jesus, right? And if you talk to people, very few people have a problem with Jesus. Even non-believers are like, well, yeah, look at what He did. Yeah. Look at who He associated with. Look at who He was here to save, all of us. He was the most selfless person ever. I think that's where I start, is like, if we want to look more like Him and start to live out our, really the internal why we were created, we have to be more selfless. Yeah. I jokingly said to my wife this morning, I held the door open for her, and then I was trying to be very selfless around her, and I said, hey, I'm talking about being selfless today on the podcast, so I better make sure I'm doing this. And she knows that I'm not perfect. We're not perfect people. There's times when we make big mistakes. There's times where I don't look like the selfless husband I should, the most selfless father. But Samuel Johnson, great quote. He says, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. You've probably heard this before. You've heard, I should be more selfless as I live. That would make me feel better. That would make those around me do better. But we need a reminder every now and then. Zig Ziglar, I'll share a couple other quotes. This is one of my all-time favorites as we run a business here. Zig Ziglar said, help others get what they want, and you will get what you want. C.S. Lewis says, aim for heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim for earth and you will get neither. Right? So that's the idea that if our goal is to create more of what earth is telling us is good, and we're trying to be, typically as sinners, as fallen people, we're trying to amass as much as we can for ourselves, we're not going to get heaven thrown in. But if we start with thinking of others, we're going to end up getting really what the earth is going to want. And Philippians 2:3-4, Jared, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Each of you should look not only as his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Just think about how different our lives would look, how different people around us would look at us if we could live that out. I'm convicted today. I'm convicted heavily. But I think that is what, again, we're trying to be more like. And when we fall short, we're going to feel out of step because we're not living out, again, Jesus' hands, His hands, showing them to the world around us.
Well, I think that, and I love everything we're talking about here, and I could not agree more. I love that quote from C.S. Lewis where he says, aim at heaven, you'll get earth. Aim for heaven and you'll get earth thrown in. If you aim at earth, you'll get neither. I think that's really interesting. But I think an important concept I think everybody to hear, but especially Christians, is that like living out this Christian life isn't just an emptying. You know what I'm saying? It's not just like, oh, I gotta give more, because I think that some people could hear a message like this or listen to a sermon at church. It's like, I'm just not doing enough. I just need to do more. I think what people need to understand, and this as well as I do, like when you do that, not only are you letting your light shine, his light shine through you, that gold inside starts to come out more. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a two-way street. It's not just give. It's give, and then you actually get more. I'm not talking finances. I'm talking about letting more of the light, come in, and also too, you tend to have more capacity to grow more. There's more fulfillment there. This whole podcast is about people feeling lost. If you want to not feel lost, start giving more, because it's not just an emptying, it's a refilling. And that's kind of the second part I think a lot of people miss in this message.
Yeah, you're starting, again, when you're doing those things, you will enjoy your life more. Mm-hmm. That's how you're created. Yeah. Even if you're coming at this from a secular space, sure, and you're saying,
they'll even admit it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I do so much better. My relationships are better. I feel better about myself when I'm doing these things. Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy a great restful retirement, yeah, but you're going to actually enjoy it. That's the best part, is if you're searching right now, Jared, and you're feeling as if maybe retirement's not what you thought it would be, there's an answer here, right? Another thing in Mere Christianity I want to touch on is how C.S. Lewis talked about how when we're feeling, you have a feeling of searching and longing, it's probably because we are not walking enough like our Creator. We are designed to walk in relationship with Him. So if you are feeling, maybe it's your marriage is not going right, maybe the success you had is no longer coming as easy. Maybe it's, there's something's letting you down. C.S. Lewis talks about there's three different kind of answers, not answers, there's three responses to that. The first one that people tend to do is they'll say, well, I'm just going to work harder to achieve it. So maybe it's, hey, I'm not thrilled with my current spouse, I'm going to find a new one. That's the world for you, right? Maybe it's I need larger trips. I need more success. I need more money. I need, I chase, and again, I am going to be unfulfilled over and over again. We know that. The second way that C.S. Lewis talks about is become like the disillusioned man. Give up. Just say, that's my life, is the way it is. I'm stuck, but I'm always going to be stuck. That's just the way things are. Or the way that, again, we hope that you would live. And again, C.S. Lewis talks about being how we would understand we are created for something bigger than this world. If we are Christ's image bearers and created for the way He looks at life, right? If we're His image bearers, we're created for not this world. So we shouldn't. He actually likens it to a baby duck searching for water, a baby searching for its mother's milk. Like, we're created in Him. Yeah. And we will continue to search and feel lost until we build the relationship in Him. Yeah.
Well, certainly one of the goals of this life that separates us from every other piece of creation is that desire to have a relationship with our Creator. And so you're speaking to the heart of everybody listening, no matter where your faith background is or where you are in your faith. That is a chord that certainly strikes with a lot of people. You just got back from a trip very recently, and we're visiting some clients of ours that you had a chance to meet. And it's interesting. Before we started recording this podcast, you were like, "Man, it was so fun to watch them." And this is, I've seen retirees that are really crushing it, man. They're just loving retirement. There's something that separates them. Give some examples from your trip this weekend.
Well, Jared, it was really very recent. I got back an hour ago. Yeah. So what I saw was clients who always become friends, and we sat out on their beautiful patio in the Black Hills and talked about what's going well for them in retirement, what's not. And it was almost always, almost everything was positive. And as I asked more questions, I learned it was positive because they were living this out. Mm-hmm. They're active in their church. He just built this beautiful shop, okay, with, of course, a neighbor who came over and stayed in a relationship, and they were working together. He was giving of his time to help out his local church. They're cutting wood and doing a bunch of things for the church and raising money for them. They're staying engaged. but they're living out areas of service in their life. It's not about just serving others, Jared, but it's intermingled in how they live. Like I wanted to tell, like I came up with the inspiration of this show somewhat from them. I'm like, I want you to look at your hands and see Christ's hands in them. Yeah. You're doing it. And they're so happy. They're so fulfilled in what they're doing. Yeah. They're not stuck in a place of roleless roles, as we talk about. Hey, I'm no longer a CEO. I'm no longer an executive. I'm no longer, a carpenter or whatever. I'm who I have always been, right? An image bearer of Christ, and they're living it out extremely well in retirement. And I loved seeing it.
Yeah, and they're not having the quintessential retirement where they're traveling tons and they're, I get like you said. There's nothing wrong with those things. What is making their retirement so good and their life so fulfilling right now is exactly what we're talking about. But to their credit, that this was on their radar long before they retired. Talk about that for just a second, how this just didn't happen by accident.
Well, the dream always had been for a number of years to make that move, right. and to step out into kind of this new stage of life, and to. Yeah, it wasn't always, hey, we're going to volunteer here or there. And she still works and actually is gainfully employed because she wants to be part-time. What I think, Jared, is so interesting about them, again, is whether one of them is still working, one is not, how they go about while they're working, hearing her talk about that, and him talk about his life as a new retiree. Both of those situations, they both kept, like, how they're created, and they didn't say it like this. They didn't say, well, we're trying to be image bearers and, we're trying to look the part, but I could hear it in their conversation. And so many conversations with retirees since writing the book have come up like this. And when I hear people that are stuck and they're in this roleless role and they're still seeing themselves as the executive or the carpenter or the nurse, whatever they were, and they're still kind of hanging on to that, but they've removed that role and not stepped into this place of really being even a greater image bearer.
There you go.
That's, again, the most fun thing is hearing those success stories.
I think people need to hear that you're not trying to recreate your identity. You don't have to find a new one. What I hear you saying is you're actually stepping into a more authentic identity, which has always been there, and now you have the opportunity to live that out more. Did I articulate that right?
Well, kind of. I think it's, we're created as image bearers of Christ.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Right.
It doesn't matter if I'm working or if I'm retired. I am... his son. That's how I look at it. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. Ask my wife, ask my kids, ask anybody that knows me. I'm not perfect. But if I'm getting closer to, again, showing people that, he's a man that lives not exactly like this world. He looks different. We should look different. And I think if we're getting closer and we're stepping into relationship with him, I think that's something that, like, in my life right now I'm working on, Jared, because I know it talks about that in Acts 17. It talks about how we need to search, right, for God. It says they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and have our being. That part about not being far of us. We typically move. When I get out of step, I've moved further away. God's still there. So if I'm going to start by trying to find out my identity and kind of get out of this spot, it doesn't mean just volunteering. It means trying to live a life where I'm looking at people as somebody I can serve. I'm looking at them as opportunities to change somebody's life. I'm pouring into those around me, even when I'm enjoying my retirement, my time of rest. So I think that's where it starts. I think it starts by looking inward and saying, okay, I want to start looking more like my Creator. And then from there, I'm going to step into and figure out what this new role in my life is.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.